But what happened to Lemp, last seen by his crew in the water? It's widely believed he tried to reboard his U-boat in a desperate effort to sink it, and was shot by the boarding party from Bulldog.
I know from time to time it's said that my boarding party shot Lemp. There's absolutely no truth whatsoever in this. None of us fired a single shot. And we didn't see the survivors. They'd been picked up or were being picked up the other side of a U-boat. And I think Lemp must have realized that the U-boat wasn't sinking. He may have seen us going over in the boat. And thinking of his past too, when he'd sunk the Athenia, which was quite a controversial matter. And I think he probably felt this is really it, letting my boat be boarded, not sinking it. And he probably just committed suicide in the water.
David's cryptographic treasures from U-110 were rushed to Bletchley, and together with the seizures from the weather ships, the code breakers were now able to crack the Enigma ciphers. It was one of the outstanding achievements of World War II. The British were soon reading the secret messages that passed between Dönitz and his U-boats as rapidly as the Germans themselves.
We began to read regularly the U-boat ciphers, and we read it without fail every day. The use of the Enigma, the fact that it was so regular, so current, meant that we were more or less able to route the convoys away from U-boat positions.
The pendulum in the Battle of the Atlantic had swung for the moment in Britain's favour. By mid-1941, the convoys were getting through with reduced losses, and the United States, though technically still neutral, was playing an ever-increasing role in ensuring those vital war supplies reached British shores.
We were in the war against the German U-boats, helping England long before the United States technically declared war. I know, I was there. I was in a destroyer. We convoyed across the Atlantic Ocean. We escorted across all the way to Iceland from the United States. Some of our fellows escorted all the way to within 100 miles of the shore of England.
By placing United States naval vessels in the convoy lanes and directly protecting the ships, the freighters and the tankers that were carrying goods to Great Britain, the United States was engaged in warlike activity.
So we were in action. Our orders were to fight back. President Roosevelt declared first that everything on a certain line in the middle of the Atlantic was on our side. Later he extended that line closer to Europe and finally declared the entire Atlantic Ocean an American lake.
It must be said that most people then and most people now do not know that the United States issued war orders in July of 1941, 6 months before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The orders were issued by Admiral Ernest J. King, who is Commander-in-Chief of the United States Atlantic Fleet. This was a direct action for the United States Navy to go to war. On September 4th, a destroyer, the USS Greer, had an exchange of fire with a U-boat at sea. Both missed. There was no damage done to either side, but the exchange of fire that everybody had worried about had taken place.
The following month, the destroyer Kearney was torpedoed and 11 seamen died. American blood had joined the Atlantic War.
Our American merchant ships must be armed to defend themselves against the rattlesnakes of the sea.
Even as Roosevelt spoke, one of those rattlesnakes, U-552, was hunting its prey in the Atlantic.
Our American merchant ships must be free to carry our American goods into the harbors of our friends.
In command of U-552 was Erich Topp, one of Dönitz's greatest aces.
And our American merchant ships must be protected by our American Navy. It can never be doubted that the goods will be delivered by this nation, whose Navy believes in the tradition of damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead.
4 days after Roosevelt's speech, Top torpedoed the American destroyer Reuben James. It was the first U.S. Navy vessel to be lost in World War II. 2/3 of the ship's company died.
As far as I was concerned, the Reuben James was a British destroyer protecting a British convoy. And therefore, I had no qualms about attacking her. Several days later, I heard on American radio that an American destroyer, the Reuben James, had been sunk. And I realized just how politically explosive this matter was. 110 lives were lost in this catastrophe. And you could say they were murdered in the most horrific way imaginable. People were swimming around in oil, on fire. It was appalling. At least 2/3 of the crew. I was haunted by this image, and I spent days and nights thinking about it, unable to change what had happened. From my point of view, I felt guilty that I might have started a war with the Americans.
Top did not, but the Japanese did. Out of the blue Hawaiian skies, 5 weeks later, they rained devastation on the American battle fleet at Pearl Harbor, sinking or seriously damaging 18 ships and killing over 2,000.
Overnight, after December 7, 1941, the entire American nation rose up in wrath against the Japanese, but there was no commitment in Congress to declare war against Nazi Germany. It took Germany to declare war on us to bring us into war with that power. And many people think that next to Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union in June of 1941, this was his biggest mistake. On December 11th, 4 days after Pearl Harbor, Hitler unilaterally, gratuitously, with no sound reason, declared war against the United States.
But that declaration of war against the USA, far from creating despondency in the U-boat arm, was celebrated.
There was great elation in the German Navy because for months they had had to fight with an arm tied behind their back against the American destroyers that were escorting British convoys across the Atlantic east and west. Now, the commanders were free to launch torpedoes at every warship they saw in the Atlantic. There was no holding back because of the Americans. Dönitz secured permission from Hitler to go ahead and plan an attack along the east shore of the United States, from Maine to Florida, in an operation that Dönitz called Paukenschlag, drumbeat. Now, Admiral Dönitz thought that his U-boats would have no problem with the United States Navy because they were untrained and unprepared, and in Dönitz's view, and certainly that of Hitler too, the United States Navy was unprofessional. The German High Command had a very poor regard for the American fighting man. Did not think that the American had the stomach for a fight. Did not think that the Americans would be able effectively to turn back those U-boats, to bloody their noses. Rather thought that the U-boats would bloody the American Navy's noses. And they were right. It was the greatest maritime disaster in modern times. It was the greatest defeat at sea suffered by the United States Navy in World War II. It was an Atlantic Pearl Harbor.